Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Miller, joined, as always, by my co-host, Ian Cummings. And today, we are talking about the Week 3 prospect matchups that we are most excited for. Listen, there is no true down week in college football. There will always be a couple of games to keep an eye on. Is it a little bit of a slower-paced week than we would like? Maybe. But there is more than enough to keep your attention on this college football Saturday. But first, I always have to ask, Ian, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Just getting through the slog of the scouting season. You know, it's always fun. And yeah, you mentioned it a little bit down this week in terms of prospect matchups, right? But you can always find some wherever you are in the college football season. We're not in the thick of conference season, right? So we don't have Alabama, Georgia. We don't have like other crazy conference matchups, North Carolina and Florida State, right? But, you know, we've still got a few very good games this week and a few that are kind of intra-conference, right? But really important matchups. So I'm excited to see what we got on tap. And we've got a lot of prospect matchups on our podcast sheet here, and we're going to roll through it.
Yes, and we do have to roll through it because if you guys listen to the podcast, you guys know that we have the gift of gab. So let's get to it immediately. And Ian, I'm looking at the sheet here. We just want to kind of go over the bolded ones first, and then if we can hit anything else, then we hit anything else. Is that correct? Is that how we want to do this?
That sounds like the most efficient use of time. Yep.
I love that. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about the Penn State game against Illinois. And I think the big matchup here, it's bolded, and I think it's the biggest matchup, is Penn State tackle Olu Fashanu versus Illinois edge Seth Coleman and defensive lineman, defensive tackle, defensive end. What the heck is he? He's really good. Jer'Zhan Newton. I am really excited about this. I got to see Olu in person against Delaware last week, and Delaware could do literally nothing against him. He is, and this is the difference between like watching football on tape and watching football in person, is when you are in person and you can see them moving on the field in real life. I don't know if it's the perspective of being in person or what it is. You are able to see kind of these differences in athleticism a lot more. I remember the first time I went down to the Shrine Bowl when I was covering stuff for Pro Football Network. And I went down and I watched, we were at Tropicana, and being down on the field and seeing how fast these guys are in person gives you a completely different perspective on the level of athletes that these guys are. When I saw Olu playing against Delaware, it was just night and day, the type of athlete he was compared to everybody else on the field. His hands are amazing. He was absolutely like air moving against that defensive line. Nothing got him in terms of defensive line games. He had about as perfect a game as you can have as an offensive lineman. And I'm really excited to see how he goes up against Newton because, I mean, I think both you and I believe Newton is right around, a top 20 prospect in this class.
Mm-hmm. And the exciting part about Newton too is that he's really alignment versatile, right?
Yeah.
Like he can play 3-tech, he can even shade outside of 1-tech, right, and kind of stun across alignments. But he can play as wide as 5-tech, and he took a few reps at like 7-tech too last year. Not often, but he does have the athleticism, the ankle flexion to do it. 6'2", around 290, right? So really stout, well leveraged lineman who can just pry around blocks with that ankle flexion, really surgical hands. And he's got really impressive strength for his frame too. You know, he's not the biggest guy, but he's got that prying strength where he can deconstruct blocks and get around you. So I'm really excited to see what he can do. I think, the adjective that came to mind for me was slippery. I mean, you don't see many interior defensive linemen or defensive linemen in general who are as slippery as he is, right? He's not the biggest guy, but he can just get through. He's very good at just deconstructing and penetrating on the interior and clogging gaps and then, generating pressure in the pass rushing phase too. So, very versatile, very high utility lineman wherever he goes. But then Seth Coleman as well, edge rusher. He came into the season, I think, around 240 pounds, but he's 6'5". He's got phenomenal length too, really explosive, twitchy rusher who's got really surprising bouts of ankle flexion on his tape too. So he can pinch the corner, he can kind of pinch those tight angles, and there are flashes of very good hand usage on his tape too. So, I think Illinois is going to mix it up with how they use those guys, and even Keith Randolph Jr. He can play outside of 5-tech too. So Fashanu may draw him at times, and he's a guy who's even more powerful, I think, than Newton at 6'5", 300. So another high energy lineman, but they're going to draw contrasting play styles. Fashanu is, right? You've got the bendy, explosive edge rusher in Coleman. You've got the surgical technician in Jer'Zhan Newton, who's got that, really unique play power for that alignment outside. But then Keith Randolph as well is another very powerful lineman. So they've got all the different flavors on that Illinois defensive line. And I think Fashanu is going to be tested more than he has so far. We mentioned him against West Virginia a couple weeks ago. Sean Martin and Jared Bartlett, another contrasting duo, and he fared very well against them. So I'm excited to see what he can do here, because I think this is the first bona fide first round talent that he's faced in Jer'Zhan Newton. Newton may be an interior lineman, but I'm willing to bet he's going to face off against Fashanu more than once, and it's going to be fascinating to see how he fares.
Yeah, and obviously you also have guys like Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac, but I wanted to bring up just quickly, in person, I had a lot of trouble actually watching Chop Robinson, and it's all because Abdul Carter on that defensive line for Penn State. That's a name that we can have circled in Penn, one of the top NFL draft prospects of next year's class. He is a freak. The next game we're going to talk about, LSU versus Mississippi State. And I think the big ones here, I know that we originally only had one of these bolded. I needed to bold the second one because I need to talk about a draft crush.
Yeah.
LSU wide receiver Malik Neighbors versus Mississippi State cornerback Deacamarion Richardson. I'm excited about this one. I think that we've seen, kind of a quiet start to Malik Neighbors' season. I don't think that it's necessarily been bad, because I thought that he was good in that first game. I thought that, the ball just kind of didn't come his way. They had some, protection issues. He had to create a little bit. I thought that he had the type of physicality that we saw last season. I thought that the route running was also there. I liked what I had seen on tape from him. I think the biggest problem is he needs to somehow find a way to separate himself, or try to regain some of the hype that he had around his draft capital, because of guys like Keon Coleman really starting to come out of their own shell and produce like crazy.
Mhm.
And then you have, him going up against a pretty good defensive backfield in Mississippi State. And obviously Deacamarion Richardson is kind of at the top there. It'll be interesting to see what Jalen Daniels. See, now I'm even forgetting about my draft crush in Jaden Daniels, because Jalen Daniels was so good last week. It'll be interesting to see how efficient Jaden can be and how often he can get the ball to Neighbors.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, just one thing that we often see from bona fide first round receiver talents is that when you're that good, you're going to get targets no matter what, right? You reach a certain point where if you're good enough, the ball is going to flow to you, kind of like that funnel effect. We've seen it with many other guys, and it's kind of indicative of Keon Coleman's early production, right? And obviously they have, a very good passer in Jordan Travis. They have a lot of weapons to play off each other, right? So that Florida State offense is definitely very fine tuned, but Keon Coleman just had the ball kept coming his way in that LSU game. And even when he was in 50-50 matchups, right, they're letting him test himself, and he's coming away big with those opportunities. So, Malik Neighbors has not been quite at that level so far this year, where the ball just keeps coming his way. And I think part of that too is, the LSU offense isn't quite clicking as much as an offense like Florida State, right? And maybe that'll come with time. We know that Jalen Daniels can pass efficiently in the quick game when he needs to, right? So I think it'll come in time, right? I think this is going to be a good opportunity for them, because the Mississippi State defense, they have some pieces, right? But it's not a dominating unit. You've got Krumedi on the defensive line. You've got Nathaniel Watson, linebacker, who's a pretty solid, underrated player. But aside from that, I don't think there's anything precluding the LSU offense from really producing here. And talking about Richardson at corner, Emmanuel Forbes was the big ticket item, the first rounder last cycle. Forbes was incredible, explosive, ball hawk, just really the transition speed that you see from him is insane. Very agile, very twitchy athlete, very competitive too. Richardson, I don't think is quite as fluid, right? He's a very long physical corner, and that's going to be how he tests Neighbors, because you mentioned it with Neighbors, not the biggest guy in terms of a length standpoint. I think he's gotten up to 200 pounds now, so he's got enough density too. He's got really good contact balance for his size, really good physicality, right? Very tenacious player. But how does he fare against a corner who's got a little bit of an edge size-wise? I think that'll be fun to see, because I do think Neighbors has the edge from the agility, explosiveness, the speed standpoint. Athletically, I think he's got that edge, and he can use that to his advantage, stacking him downfield or separating his stems. I think all that's there for him. But I think this could be a game where Neighbors really starts to take that next step and starts to validate his early stock with production now. And, no matter what, you want the film to come first, right? The film coming to the season said that Neighbors was very good. And he's had some plays where he's flashed that ability. But you want the numbers to align at some point. I think this could be a good opportunity for that to happen.
And speaking about numbers aligning, the numbers for Jaquavius Marks are aligning with my love for him. So far this season, 43 carries, 250 yards. That is 5.8 yards a pop. He's got 3 touchdowns in 2 games, and he has caught 8 passes for 91 yards. Listen, he has caught a ton of passes in the past. He caught 83 of them in 2021 alone, but he has never really averaged a great number as a receiver. 4.5 yards as a freshman, 6 yards as a sophomore, 6 yards as a junior. If he can stick around that 10-yard mark as a receiver out of the backfield, that will be huge for him when it comes to, the explosiveness and the twitchiness, the ability to make guys miss when you catch the ball out of the backfield, because I think we talk about receiving ability quite a bit with guys, but if all you are is a check down guy who, maybe you can pick up a first down on 3rd and 7, but most likely it's going to be a check down and it's going to end up being 4th and 3. That doesn't have a whole lot of value. You might as well stay in and block and hope that the quarterback's able to get through another progression and find a receiver downfield for a first down. If he can prove that he can be more, maybe not a downfield weapon, but somebody who can create as a receiver a little bit more, I think that would be huge for him going into the NFL draft. Obviously, we want to see him, his ability to pass protect as well. I thought that he was good at that. I thought that he was willing. I thought that he was actually quite intelligent when it comes to his assignments when he was supposed to be pass protecting, but he's a smaller guy, so he got beat up a little bit as well. I think going up against a guy like Omar Speights is awesome, because the one thing that Speights does the best is come downhill and smack people. So I want to see if he's able to break a couple of tackles against Speights, because in that first game against Florida State, everyone was missing tackles against Florida State, but Omar Speights was the guy who was bringing people down.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to see what Marks has against a guy like Speights, a downhill run defending linebacker.
Yeah, I saw that matchup on the sheet and I wrote it down. I was like, yeah, he's going to bold that one. He's going to bold that. It's going to happen at some point. But Marks is, a very, very versatile running back. But you mentioned it, right? Like if all you can do is those short swing routes, like the routes out of the backfield, right? If you don't have that variety in your route tree, right, you're a little more predictable. Defenses kind of know what to expect from you, and that kind of constricts what you can do in that phase. So adding a new dimension to that could be very valuable for him. And then, going against Omar Speights too. Speights, to me, in my preseason evaluation, I was really impressed at how, the all-around utility with him is really impressive, right? Because he can come downhill. He's got really good explosiveness coming downhill, but that take-on strength too. He's like 6'1", 237, so he's rocked up. He's got a lot of play strength, but he can play in coverage too. He's agile. He's fluid enough too, and he can match running backs at stems, and he's got enough explosiveness and speed to carry them to the sideline as well. So, I think just a really well-rounded player and a very solid tackler too. So you need to win every part of the rep just to get open, but then showing that you can break through contact against him too, that's just another deal entirely. So I think he'll test Marks in every phase of the game, and this could be an opportunity for either one of them to make a statement and say, hey, I'm the superior prospect in this phase. So that's a little fun prospect matchup that I will definitely be tuning into.
And the next one we're going to get to, we are on to another game, another SEC contest. South Carolina quarterback Spencer Rattler versus the Georgia defense. I fear for Spencer Rattler here, because that offensive line is not very good, and Georgia's defense is very good. That defensive line is going to get after him. It's going to be a tough day for Spencer Rattler, and I think that these are the kinds of games that are really going to he's going to have to really dig deep into his character, stay upright, and get back upright when he gets knocked down, because he's going to get knocked down a lot. And I think, going to the NFL side of things real quick, what we saw from Daniel Jones against the Dallas Cowboys, that kind of environment, it's just simply not conducive to success. I want to see in that unsuccessful series, which we're probably going to get, I want to see him keep calm in the pocket and not let it affect his decision making to the point where he's making awful decisions with the football. Sometimes taking a sack is the best thing that you can do for your offense. I want to see that processing speed be as quick as I thought that it has been so far this season. I think that that's something that he has really improved, the confidence in what he is seeing. And I want to see that again with what is going to be his toughest defensive test of the season.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Georgia defense is really built to just take time away from the quarterback in both phases, right? You look at the defensive line. Obviously, Nazir Stackhouse can encumber blocks, but he's got some underrated pass rushing flashes for his size. You've got Michael Williams, who's not eligible right now, but he's a guy who we're going to be looking at, I think, in the near future as an early round edge prospect because of his ability to, get outside and get around the tackles. Chaz Chambliss has made some plays, some splash plays. That Jack linebacker, Smail Mondin, very versatile linebacker who can be a blitzing threat too. But then in coverage as well, Tyke Smith has been very, very authoritative, tenacious coming downhill, right? And from that hybrid star role, and he's very physical, very explosive. Javon Bullard is the guy who's got that dog in him. He's the guy who's played a little bit of strong safety, a little bit of nickel as well for Georgia, but another guy who flows the ball really quickly downhill, and he will shock you. Right. So these guys, they flow downhill fast. They take away those short routes. And Spencer Rattler, he's got to process that. Right. So he's got to process that. And at the same time, there's going to be a lot of pressure coming downhill from that defensive line that's always multifaceted, always very, very, aggressive on the attack. Right. So those two factors combined, pressure and coverage, it's always the winning combination for Georgia. But I think this year in particular, too, it's still there. You've got a lot of young talent. And then Malachi Starks, too. At safety, who's another guy who could be a first rounder in 2025. If Rattler tries to test him deep too, the lid might be closed, right? So I think this Georgia defense is built to really put pressure on the quarterback this year more than every year, but especially this year. And I think for Spencer Rattler, a quarterback who can produce some volatile results under pressure, the key for him, as you mentioned, sometimes you're going to face circumstances where the win is pretty unlikely. So can you just stay true to your game, stay efficient, minimize, big losses on plays, right? And just try to keep your team in it. Even if he doesn't come away with the win, I don't think that can be a knock against him this week in particular because he's going to be facing pretty heavy odds. But if he can just stay steady, stay true to his game and not be the cause of his team's volatility, that'll be a good start.
Yes. And the next matchup we're going to talk about is in the same game. We have two in this one. I want to talk a little bit about Tonka Hemingway, the South Carolina defensive tackle versus Georgia's Cedric Van Pran. And I want to talk about this because Van Pran, I think, for both of us, is the best center in this draft class.
Yeah.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at a guy like Hemingway, I'm really interested to see what kind of play he's able to produce against a guy that is such a high level talent like Van Pran, because I liked him quite a bit, but late in the season I did see against some other NFL competition, you saw Van Pran get a little bit over his skis. And I think Tonka Hemingway is a guy who he doesn't have great bend, he doesn't have great explosiveness, but he plays his absolute tush off. And I want to see that type of tenacity. I want to see Van Pran, and Hemingway has pretty good power, but I want to see Van Pran really hold up to down in, down out Hemingway punching him in the mouth, because that is what's going to happen if he gets those one-on-one opportunities with him. Now, obviously, if there's a bunch of double teams and they're running a bunch of duo, it's going to be a little bit different. But I want to see how that looks against, specifically in pass protection, because I think that where I saw some of the flaws with Van Pran's game, I think it was in the pass protection phase and not as much in the run game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Van Pran's bread and butter is getting out in space, attacking guys, because he's super explosive. I mean, getting to the second level, it just happens in a snap with him. And then he's incredibly physical, and he's got good density, good strength. So I think going on the attack and being authoritative is really his strength. But when you're in pass pro, you got to be a little more patient, a little more disciplined with your technique, your leverage. That's where things can go a little bit awry with him. And you mentioned Tonka Hemingway. He's aptly named because he looks like a Tonka truck out there sometimes. I mean, he's heavy-handed, he's long and powerful. And I think that style of play is something that can exploit some of the volatility in Cedric Van Pran's game as a pass protector. So I think staying measured, staying composed, keeping your leverage through reps, I think that'll be key for him. But yeah, I mean, I love that you mentioned this one because I think both these prospects, again, we got to see how often they face each other one on one, right? Because Tonka Hemingway, there'll be some reps where he's a three tech and he's going up against the guard, right? They might not see a ton of each other, but there will be other instances where maybe they do. So I think you want to keep an eye on that and see how they fare. And in particular, too, I mean, just that Georgia offensive line in general. I mean, it's always a well-oiled machine. It's always a very cohesive unit. Xavier Truss, a guard, is another very good player, too. Amarius Mims, there may be some blocks where Mims is moving inside. He's taking on Hemingway, too. So no matter what, no matter who he's facing, there's going to be talent on the other side that you can prove yourself against. So I think Hemingway, this will be a good test for him.
And another good test, I think, is going to be Kansas State quarterback Will Howard versus Missouri's defense. Now, I haven't gotten to see a ton of Will Howard. He was obviously ridiculously productive last season. Talk to me a little bit about what you see in him, and then tell me about what kind of your favorite matchup is on the defensive side of the ball with him.
Yeah, for sure. I think Will Howard, he's kind of remained in our sleeper QB discussion, right? He was in our sleeper QB podcast. He's not quite in our top 10 yet. I don't know if he rises into the day two range, but
Such a good class.
yeah, it's such a good class. And
ridiculous.
that's one thing. It's indicative of the class's depth too. But I think Will Howard, he's around 6'4, 6'5, 240. So he's a big dude. He's a really good pocket passer. I think the pocket operation ability, particularly how it's grown since his freshman season, he was one of those passers who got thrown into the fire pretty early, right? And that's when pressure can really take over as a young quarterback. And he was really volatile early in his career. He ended up being benched and he was kind of a backup for a few years. Then Adrian Martinez had the starting job for Kansas State early on in 2022. But Will Rogers, or Will Howard, he ended up taking it. I'm getting my QBs mixed up. But Howard ended up taking the role back, had a few rocky bumps early on, but he really caught his stride and ended up helping lead Kansas State to a Big 12 championship. So, he's got that, there's that redemptive arc that you've seen, which you always want to see quarterbacks face adversity and then fight through it. And Will Howard absolutely did that. I think he has good general tools. I think he's a good athlete for his size. I think he has decent arm talent too. For me, the really impressive parts of his game is the pocket management. I think he's very good at navigating the pocket, staying composed and poised as he does so. I think he's a good processor. I think he's a good decision maker. He's very measured. He'll take what the defense gives him, and he's pretty accurate too, right? So is he elite in any one area? I'm not sure, but I think the pocket navigation, the accuracy, the ability to process quickly and make decisions quickly, those are all there with him. So I think this game could be a good test for just how good those traits are on the gradient, right? We know they're good, but can he, because he doesn't quite have elite physical talent, can he take the next step and really reach that tier to offset the non-elite physical talent? I think that'll be key for him. And I think this Missouri defense is really, really apt to test him in that regard. We say the word test a lot on this podcast, the prospect matchups, but hey, that's what we're looking for, guys to be challenged and how they respond to it. So this Missouri defense, right? Chris Abrams-Drain at corner, I think is going to be the biggest test for them because he's going up against Phillip Brooks at wide receiver. Brooks has been productive so far this year, but Abrams-Drain, really twitchy, high energy, fleet-footed cover man, really good ball skills. He plays beyond his frame. He's a little bit lighter, but he's pretty chippy. You like to see that competitive toughness. Ennis Rakestraw on the other side, another guy who's pretty twitchy, a little long-limbed, a little leaner, but he's another guy who's got very good ability at the catch point, converting and playing the ball through the catch point. On the defensive line, Darius Robinson, powerful, heavy-handed blocker with great proportional length. He can be a forklift on the interior. Christian Williams is a guy that I really like. He's kind of well leveraged, kind of that sawed-off defender who's got that same explosiveness. And then Niles Gaddy from Jackson State. He's a transfer from the FCS level, but he's got 2.5 sacks through 3 games, or I think only 2 games from Missouri. So he's been very productive. He's another very explosive, long-limbed edge rusher who's got great power capacity, great motor on the attack as well. He could be a legitimate riser in the 2024 NFL draft. So he could be a guy who kind of challenges Will Howard and forces them to step up and kind of take those shots in the pocket. And then Tyron Hopper, I haven't even mentioned him yet, but versatile, explosive linebacker, very good in coverage. He's got some blitzing utility. So overall, I think at all 3 levels, the Missouri defense has the pieces to put the pressure on Will Howard. And, this will be a big game for him. I think they played each other last year. I can't remember who won, but this is a familiar opponent, one that they know, but one that they know is going to be tough as well. So I think Will Howard, he's a very good pocket operator. He's got enough talent, but can he lead his team to a win in a crucial, in a statement game? I think that'll be the biggest thing for him.
Yeah, for me, Tyron Hopper is one of my favorite players in this draft class. So I'm really super excited to see kind of what he looks like just over the season as I watch him when we get into some of the more, SEC play. I want to see if he's able to kind of reproduce what he was able to last year. He reminds me a lot of another Missouri linebacker who went there a couple of years ago and has been a pretty good NFL linebacker despite not testing like an elite athlete at the NFL Combine. So, moving on to the next game we have here, we have Ole Miss against Georgia Tech. And you bolded this one, and it's the only one that you bolded out of kind of our miscellaneous prospect matchups. So take me through what intrigues you about this matchup.
Yeah, so yeah, and there's a few other ones that I thought about bolding. I think yeah, like Travis Glover versus Yabi Oki, Damon Clowney. That's power group of five one that's pretty intriguing. You've got Kingsley Suamataia versus Trajan Jeffcoat, very another long, heavy-handed rusher at Arkansas going up against a potential first-round tackle. But Georgia Tech and Ole Miss, man, that one stood out to me for multiple reasons. I think one, just from a team-to-team standpoint, Georgia Tech has been much more productive this year. They got Haynes King at quarterback, who's actually kind of embarking on a resurgence. He's been very productive. The passing offense is doing work. So I think they might have the firepower now that they've kind of opened up their offense a bit to potentially give a challenge to a team like Ole Miss. But then at the same time, on the defensive side of the ball, when I was doing my ACC preview before the season, Georgia Tech kind of stood out to me with kind of the under the radar prospects that they had. KJ Wallace in the slot is one guy that I really liked. He's a Notre Dame transfer. He's already had 3 pass deflections so far this year, so already having one of his most productive seasons on the ball, but also a guy who flows downhill quickly. He's got the physicality that you want to see from your slot defenders, kind of suffocating those interior wide receivers. I think the biggest test for him will be the Ole Miss explosiveness. One thing that Ole Miss receivers always are is explosive, and that is the same. That is the case this year. Trey Harris, a transfer they got from Louisiana Tech, he's been very productive already through this year. He's around 6'2", 205, so he's got the size and he accelerates in a hurry. He gets vertical very quick. Jordan Watkins is a well-known speed threat from his time at Louisville, and they use his speed to stretch the field a lot, but he can get open in the middle of the field as well. So Ole Miss has the dynamic ability. They have the athleticism. KJ Wallace, really want to see how he kind of handles that and how he stays measured out of the slot. But then LaMiles Brooks at safety too. This is a guy who's around 6'1", close to 200. He's long, right? He's got that athleticism, but he's very fluid too. That was one thing that I noticed for him. The discipline with his positioning from 2022 can improve a little bit, but one of those guys who has the size and the coverage mobility, the fluidity that you want to see, from a guy who can play single high or two high, adjusting his hip leverage is not very hard for him despite his height. So I think LaMiles Brooks, and he's shown that he can make plays over the top. I think he has enough range to do it. I think this Ole Miss receiving core is going to be a great fit for him in terms of matchups because of the speed and the explosiveness they have. And if they can limit some big plays, they can get the ball in the hands of their offense. Maybe Georgia Tech makes this a close one. I don't know, but I think it's going to start with that receiver secondary matchup. And there's a few prospects to watch within that.
I love it. I'm sitting here. This is a little bit of my flu game. I am sick. I am trying to just kind of survive here, but it is very nice to sit here and listen to somebody who can rattle off so much fantastic information about the entire college football landscape, even the conferences that you are not assigned to, like the SEC, which is my neck of the woods. You continue to put in the work, and you continue to be an absolute rock star. And I thank you for putting me on your back throughout the course of this podcast specifically, because I am struggling to keep my eyes open. Guys, I hope you enjoy week 3 of the college football season. Week 4 will be better because I will be back to 100%, and we will have some awesome matchups to go over for week 4. We'll talk about week 3 quickly next week on Monday.
Is there anything else you want to go over in the matchups before we close it out? Any other ones that we forgot to mention?
I don't think any caught my eye. I think the one that I would have brought up would have been Malachi Corley versus Ohio State's defense, but I don't know the injury update on Corley at the moment.
Yeah, that'll be the big one because I want to see him against Denzel Burke, man,
I
because
know.
Burke, explosive, physical, really good ball skills too. But I think Corley has enough speed to potentially challenge him in open field. So that'll be a fun one. I want to circle back to Illinois and Penn State real quick because
Let's
I
hit it.
know we talked about Jer'Zhan Newton going up against Olu Fashanu, but there's some other ones to go over in this matchup too. Keandre Lambert Smith has been very productive early on for Penn State. He's kind of taken that primary receiver role for them. Another guy who fits that explosive rack mold, but he can be a vertical threat too. And Drew Aller's gone to him a lot, facing off against Tavion Nicholson, a really physical, tenacious defender who's got really appealing coverage mobility, the foot speed, and then the ability to the click and close ability for me is really what sold me on him because he closes downhill in a flash. Reaction speed is through the roof. But he hasn't been super productive yet this year. I think part of that is just he's not being tested. So I think this will be a fun one for him. On the other side of the ball, you've got Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac. You mentioned who was the other one? Abdul Carter, right? So not eligible, but a really fun edge rusher group. But the Illinois offensive line is very good too. Julian Pearl at left tackle, a little heavy footed, but he's very powerful, very physical. And he's got pretty solid technique too. I think he counteracts the lacking athleticism with good technique. And then Isaiah Adams at guard too is a very, very good player, very physical. Again, they really set the tone on that Illinois front. But he can kick out the tackle. I think he has enough athleticism to do it. He's shown he can do it in a flash. So they may face him there. And then Kalen King versus Isaiah Williams. That's one I'm actually a little more intrigued to see. We know Kalen King. We know the story on him. We've talked about him multiple times. I know the guy who's just very high energy cover man. He's another guy who just brings the smoke, despite not being the biggest guy. He will get in your grill. He's got really good foot speed, really good fluidity, route intelligence, and route recognition ability is through the roof again. But Isaiah Williams, man, if you get stuck with Isaiah Williams in man coverage, he is shifty. He is very, very good change of direction, very good stop and start ability, and he can use that to put defensive backs on a string. And if he gets the ball in space too, very tough to tackle. One-on-one is a rack threat with his ability to make you miss and ability to disrupt tackling angles. So a lot to watch in that Illinois-Penn State game. I think that's the first marquee Big Ten matchup that we've seen this year, and I think it reaches the hype. I think it matches the hype, and I don't know if Illinois beats Penn State, knocks them down that pedestal, but they've got enough NFL draft talent to make it a close one.
The last one I'm going to bring up, and I'm going to bring this one up very quickly here, is South Carolina wide receiver Xavier Leggett versus Georgia cornerback Kamari Lassiter. And that is mostly because our guy at South Carolina, Juice, isn't playing. And so Leggett is the guy right now for South Carolina. He had a huge game in week 1. And I want to see what he's able to do against some really stiff competition. A lot of people like Kamari Lassiter quite a bit. Obviously, he's a Georgia defensive back. I want to see kind of the biggest thing that I look at when I look at Kirby Smart defenses and Nick Saban defenses is the processing ability. It's part of the reason why I am so high on somebody like Kool-Aid McKinstry. I know a lot of people look at him and they're like, oh, he's 6'1", he's 195 pounds, he's a press man corner. No, he's not. He's a zone corner. He can play press man, but I want to see Lassiter and the processing ability because it is such a vast defensive playbook. There's so much going on in their zone match coverages, and I want to see processing and being able to defend against somebody like Leggett, who has been very productive so far this year.
I love it, man. I love it. There's so many matchups to go over. I feel like we could even with the lesser ones, we could spend like 10 to 15 more minutes. But hey, we're actually getting out of here at a reasonable clocking time. So I'm gonna hand it over to you before we start talking about something else. Before we hit that dangerous landmark, let's send them off.
Yes, let's send you guys off. Have fun watching college football in week 3. We love it. We're gonna be sitting down and watching it, and I love you guys. Goodbye.